Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Diamond Factory. We have been reincorporated from our Diamonds in the Darkness to the Diamond Factory, and this is all because of some neighborhood connections that I have made. So, speaking of those connections, the first one, of course, is my guest tonight, Miss Deborah Kahn Cunningham, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening within the Jewish community, most certainly that have been making the headlines here recently, and we have actually changed the format of our show. And we're going to deal more with solutions and people that have solutions rather than trying to discuss uh, problems. As you can see, Miss Cunningham is here with us. Good evening, Miss Cunningham. How are you doing? Once again, we have no audio. We can't hear you now. We can see you fine, but we cannot hear you. No, it's not that one.
Oh,
There we go.
There we go.
Okay,
I
we
am
got this.
If you need to be clear or not, we're not quite as clear. Hi, everybody. It might be not as clear because it seems to be coming connected to the camera. Okay. So,
Okay.
Okay, but you can hear me now.
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you now. How is your evening going?
It's good. It's good. It's a pleasure to be on with you. So I'll admit, what you didn't hear before is you said, "How are you?" and went nervous, and you said, "I can't hear you." So maybe I wasn't supposed to say that. Anyway, it's a real pleasure to be on with you, James. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, welcome to the Diamond Factory. And as I was telling our audience, we are going to start talking with some of the people that have solutions and are dealing with solutions rather than problems. I have spent probably 2 years, and as you can see, this is what problems cause. But so
Yeah, well, Ray, there wasn't as much of it a couple of years ago.
Oh well, I like to, I just tell people I'm a Scrooge, and I refuse to cover the gray. So these are signs of wisdom. They're not gray hair. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, uh, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so my name is the whole thing. Mostly I'm known as Debbie, but I am Deborah Kahn Cunningham. And these days, settling more and more comfortably into what is sometimes described as the wise crone period of life. I'm doing coaching in the guise of virtual Jewish mother for rent. And I find it's something that, I am Jewish, and it is not necessarily Jewish focused, but if I say it, everybody laughs and they immediately have an idea, sort of the type of coach that I am, and, what would I want to ask a Jewish mother? Uh, it's not my background, but I probably could have gotten something similar with, uh, angry Italian mother for rent. But I'm Jewish, so I'm opting on for my background.
Okay.
And part of what I do is I help people find solutions. There's a lot of coaches out there that they're all about, we're going to help you pull all the answers from inside. And I don't know about you, but when I go to people and I say, I need to know how to do such and such, or can you solve this problem for me? Sometimes it's nice when they say, you have the answer inside. But you know what I'd really like them to do is say, take a left turn, go 4 steps in that direction, and there's your answer.
See?
And so I prefer to do coaching along the lines of a combination, or as somebody said, oh, you're a consultant and a coach. And I went, yeah, I'll take that definition.
Mhm.
And the other thing that I've done for actually since before Windows computers is I'm a Microsoft Office trainer. I help people who are terrified of computers get good at Microsoft Office.
Oh my goodness. Uh, I can tell you, and I'll be definitely dating myself, but I once had a program where we were supposed to learn key punch. People probably don't even know what key punch is anymore, but
Mm-hmm.
I remember, uh, I believe it was the second week, I had a suitcase full of punch cards, and you had to feed them into the machine, you know,
Yep.
and then but by the time I got back into civilian life, there was a thing called AOL. So those key punch cards, I could throw them all away. But
Yeah.
and we'll be talking about how fast technology it has become and how fast I believe it's overtaking us. But there are a few things that I would like to ask you, and I'm going to. Some of them are going to touch on current events and what's happening in Israel in particular. And of course, we're going to talk a lot more about your role as a Jewish mother. Uh, uh, you did give me an idea, though, because I have 7 black sisters. I'm wondering how I could say 7 angry birds. I don't know. But uh, anyway, so let's start with my first one. And my first question is about anti Semitism and current events. Uh, how has the current wave of anti Semitism and violent protests across the war in Israel impacted you and your community personally?
So I grew up with a mother who grew up north of New York City in southern Westchester County. And when she was 7 years old, her best friend said to her, well, Jane, you'd be my best friend if you weren't Jewish. And it defined her to the degree that I know that story like it's part of me. My mom grew up, she was a young woman, college age during World War II, and she grew up in a world where there was just a lot of overt anti Semitism. There was a Jewish sorority because the Jewish girls were not allowed in other sororities. Um, there were places when my parents, in 1961, when they bought a house in Chappaqua, New York, um, they were looking, and my mother said, what about this neighborhood? And the realtor said, Mrs. Kahn, we like our clients to be happy. I would rather show you other neighborhoods. And she had specifically asked because she knew it was a neighborhood that didn't sell to Jews in 1961. And my father took her aside that evening and said, look, Jane, do you want the children to grow up in a similar situation to the one you did? Or do you want them not to have to deal with that? So they actually built their own house in a new neighborhood. Um, and so all of this anti Semitism was things that had come to me through my parents. Um, on my father's side, a third of his family came to the United States. Of the two-thirds that were left in Eastern Europe, in the area of Belorussia, um, in a very famous Jewish community called Bialystok, something like 80% of them died in the Holocaust. They went to the concentration camps and they did not survive. Um, that was my history. But I grew up in a world where it was a non issue pretty much, never came up. I thought it was gone. I thought it was gone because it wasn't considered polite or proper to be anti Semitic, at least not openly, and simply because it didn't affect me. And since October 7th, my world personally has been rocked. Um, Suddenly, everything I heard about when I was young, and then just sort of a non issue through most of my adulthood, is slapping me in the face. To the point where last year I had an 8-month contract working for a corporation. It was a limited contract, and I was very happy with it. And the agents, after it ended, the agency that I had worked for called me and said, mostly we deal with, sort of project managers and more technical people than what your area of expertise is, but we have this job that just came in that's got your name on it. I mean, they're looking for somebody who's a Microsoft Office expert. Um, and we're just very excited. Are you interested? Because you're available as far as we're aware. And I said, oh, yeah, it sounds great. I'd love to. And they called me back within 30 minutes and said they're excited. We have a uh, phone interview or Zoom interview set up for you in 2 days and a few hours. And I went, great. And the next afternoon, and this was after October 7th. So this was sometime in around mid November, I think, of last year. And they called me up 24 hours later, less than 24 hours before the interview, and said, the interview's been canceled. And we'll be honest, we have no idea why. What we asked them, is there a problem? Can we reschedule? And they sent an email that said something along the lines of, she's not in alignment with our priorities or values or something. It just, the agency couldn't figure it out, couldn't get any answers. And because I work, I'm fairly conservative politically, um, but I don't post much. I have a daughter who's a chronic pain patient, and on my Facebook page, I occasionally post things supporting the pain community, and that are angry at the DEA for the fact that they go after legitimate pain physicians instead of the fentanyl crisis, which makes me crazy because my daughter is one of 10 million undertreated pain patients in this country now, where the suicide rate among pain patients in general and veterans in particular has gone through the roof. So there's that issue. And this was November of 2023, and I had posted a prayer for Israel. And the only reason I can think of, to be honest, because it was so odd that that interview was canceled, is I know that companies go and check, social media. And I think they saw that prayer for Israel, which was pinned front and center on my Facebook page, and they didn't want to work with me. So my interview was canceled. That may not be the case, but that's what I think happened. So in that sense, it very directly affected me.
Um, I can say that truly I know the feeling. Uh, it does bring back some memories when you talk about the 60s and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Before I did my first tour, we went to Detroit uh, as part of the riots, and after they had taken weapons from the National Guard, they sent us up there, and it was very odd to me that there was nothing burning in Pontiac, but Detroit was on fire. you know, you know, just you know, but so let's go back a little further because I did spend a lot of time in Pittsburgh, and uh, the shooting in Squirrel Hill is, you know, I'm not saying that I knew anyone personally, but I had spent a lot of time in that neighborhood uh, driving. Actually, this was before there was Lyft and Uber and whatnot, so I was driving cabs in Pittsburgh, and also, so I was very familiar with the community. So I think that is what brought the national attention. But there, as you speak of in 2023, uh, uh, the undercurrent has been there uh, in this country. I would say even since the 1940s.
Well, the anti-Semitism has a grand tradition, you know, internationally and in this country. It's not just since the 1940s, and um, it probably goes back significantly to around 1900 when the first massive waves of Jewish immigration came to this country. Um, but it's I there are some sayings that I hadn't heard previously, um, that have come out in the community that I hear. One of them is that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine. When they start coming after the Jews, pay attention. They're going to come after you next. You know, there's what was the other one I was thinking of? Something somebody said. Oh, somebody said, be careful when they come for the Saturday people because they come for the Sunday people next. And I will say that the majority of my closest friends, um, I will describe them as people of faith. They're not necessarily Jewish. I have a lot of born again Christian close friends. What they have is they have a sense of morality and meaning and purpose, and their lives are to a greater or lesser degree God centered. Um, if there's a question, the next about anything, the next question is, what would God want me to do? What are God's expectations for me? Most of them are Christian. Some of them are Jewish. Some of them are Hindu and Baha'i and even Muslim. But they all have that as their backup question. And I think one of the big problems in general is there's just been an increasing distancing from faith over time. It's very funny. Not, it's just not, I wasn't raised in a religious household. I realized when I got a little older, I was raised in an incredibly Jewish way, but it wasn't religious in terms of us going to temple, keeping kosher, celebrating Jewish holidays, sorts of thing. Um, but I realized later that I had been raised very, very Jewish. And I had a thought there. Let me think. I was talking about people of faith, and I was raised Jewish. It was a good point, and it just slipped.
Well, maybe while answering this next question, it'll come back to you.
Yeah, yeah.
What strategies and support systems has your community implemented to cope with and
Oh.
respond to these challenges?
Okay,
I said,
I've
okay.
got the answer to that, and I remember what I was going to say before. So, I wasn't raised in a Jewish community, but over time, and one of the coping mechanisms, so my return to a more spiritual life and a more structured Jewish life has come through an organization called Chabad, Chabad. It was founded, um, by uh, by Rabbi Menachem Schneerson of righteous memory, if you say it the way everybody does. He was one of those rabbis who took entire small Jewish communities out of Eastern Europe just before World War II. And he got several of them out. There were other rabbis who did similar things. But he started a movement in this country. Jews don't proselytize. So, are you Christian, James?
I'm more agnostic.
Okay. We'll pretend for a minute that you're Christian.
Okay. I'm a
It would be
preacher's I'm a
perfect.
preacher's son though.
Okay. But it would be perfectly reasonable for you to walk up to somebody and say, "Have you found Christ? I have wonderful answers for you. I can bring joy and happiness to your life with this solution." I'm not allowed to do that. I can't go to you, James, and say, "But wouldn't you like to be a Jew?" I'm literally not allowed. We are not permitted to proselytize. And if you come to me and you say, "I want to be Jewish," I have to send you to a rabbi, and he has to try at least 3 times to persuade you this is a bad idea. You don't want to do that. So
But I
um,
love Sammy Davis.
he must have really wanted it. It's not that you can't convert, but it ain't easy. You don't get to jump in the river. I'm baptized. I'm claiming
Okay.
Jesus is there for me. It's not that simple if you want to be Jewish.
Okay.
So, so the thing is, the United States in the late 50s and early 60s, as far as the Jewish community, was swimming in Reform Jews who knew nothing about what it meant to live Yiddishkeit, a Jewish life. They were marrying non Jews right, left, and center. They were barely paying lip service to their holidays, their traditions. They didn't know what it means to be Jewish in the traditional sense. And Rabbi Schneerson set out to proselytize within his own community. So the Chabad movement is full of Orthodox Jews whose job is to take people like me and celebrate ecstatically every time I do something that's a little more Jewish. If I, you know, have a Jewish naming ceremony, if I never had it, if I light my candles on Friday, if I decide I want to start keeping kosher, you know, whatever it is, if I want to simply study and learn what it is to be Jewish. So I got involved with Chabad. I actually got involved with Chabad accidentally when my daughter was very young. I didn't even know I was going to a Chabad temple. I took her a couple of times. I didn't realize what it was then. But when my daughter was in college, she got involved in Chabad at Texas A&M University. And then when she became ill and came home, we got involved with Chabad in New York City, where we lived at the time. Um, so part of my own response is to increase my connection with Chabad, go to them and ask questions. The word tzedakah means charity. Um, and my daughter was showing me a recording of Rabbi Schneerson where a young man came to him and said, "My best friend died, and I'm just so unhappy." And Rabbi Schneerson looked at him and said, "Don't focus on the sense of loss or unhappiness. Pray for his soul. Do tzedakah in his name. Celebrate in your life everything that you loved about him." And there's a lot of that going on in the Jewish community right now. There's an attempt to focus on gratitude where we can, support Israel, support fellow Jews where we can, study and understand what it is to be Jewish, you know, uh, and to celebrate it. And the response of the Jewish community in general has been shock, just an unbelievable amount of shock. One of the things, so my daughter, who was training for the Marine Corps before she became ill, she said one of the changes in her life is whenever we went to a bat mitzvah ceremony for one of the daughters of one of our local Chabad rabbis. And as my daughter said, there's a lot of Jews in one place, there's a lot of children running around. Her first instinct now is check for where all of the exits are, keep an eye on the children, and figure out how to get them out of there as fast as possible if anything goes wrong. Now, that's in San Diego 6 months ago. But that is her first reaction. She doesn't expect there to be an attack, but all of the Chabad in that I'm aware of, this was started in New York a few years ago, but all of it has been ramped up significantly, since October of last year. They all have security guards. If
Yes.
you go to many temples on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, there's a security guard there. I don't see security guards in front of all the churches. I don't see them in front of the mosques. But every Jewish, location probably has security guards now.
Yeah. I would, and yeah, you say, I mean, it's very frightening these times, especially when you mentioned the young kids, and this was one of the things that we also had to go through uh, coming back from Vietnam. A lot, baby killers and things like this. Uh, you know, uh, but people have to remember these are the horrors of war and the horrors of the times that we live in. But speaking of the times that we live in, I want to ask you about the role of traditions and in a time of crisis. How do you see the Jewish traditions and rituals playing a role in helping families navigate these difficult times? And can you share a specific ritual or tradition that has become particularly meaningful or comforting in this time of crisis?
For me personally, I wouldn't say that there's anything dramatically new or different, but there's a sense of deepening appreciation and focus on what I'm already doing. Um, when my daughter and I moved to San Diego 5 years ago, we found a Chabad community to connect with. And several months in, we made a commitment, for example, to lighting our Friday night candles. And in more than 4 years, I think we've missed maybe 6 times. Um, and I will say that since October 7th, every Friday night when I light candles, there's an awareness that wasn't there before. There's a sense of connection. I wasn't per se praying for Israel every Friday night. I do now. Um, so it's not that there was a dramatic change, but there's a deeper awareness. It's more, it's intensified. Um, I go out of my way. I don't have a huge amount of money that I can offer, for charity, but a significantly larger percent goes to support Jewish causes. Um, one of the things that I did personally was after October 7th, um, there was a huge shift in giving by the Jewish community to Israel. Some of that went to things like the support of Chabad in Israel. Some of it went to supporting the IDF. Some of it went to just, a lot of Israeli supportive Jewish causes. And I gave to several of those. I did an event to raise money for Jewish charities. But I also I thought about it. If anything else, this has all made us more thoughtful. I thought about it, and I gave money to the Chabad, one of the large Chabads in the Ukraine, because I figured it wasn't that they were forgotten, but some of the support they'd had been shifted directly to Israel. And it's very interesting because Chabad of the Ukraine, as things had been collapsing in Ukraine, was taking in Jewish children and particularly Jewish orphans. They then moved a whole large group of them to Israel, where it was supposedly safer. And then, and the Chabad that took in the largest number of them was relatively close to the Gaza border. So they weren't attacked on October 7th, but they were intensely aware of the location and stuff. And there was a very interesting conversation that I read. A Jewish psychologist who was traveling around trying to help children in particular who were traumatized by the October 7th events went to that Chabad where they had an orphanage which now had a large number of Ukrainian Jewish orphans. And she walked in and she was talking to the rabbi who ran it. And I don't know if you're aware, but there's a huge number, I mean, a significant percent of the Jewish population in Israel isn't deeply religious. They are intensely Jewish, but they're not necessarily religious. Or as my mother said after she visited Israel years ago, she said, it's fascinating. They've replaced the language and the history for the religion. You know, they're proud to be Jews, but they don't think of themselves as religious Jews. And this psychologist was clearly that type of Israeli. And she went to the rabbi and she said, you know, is there anything I can do to help? What are the children doing? You know, what are you doing with them? And he said, we are praying. We are praying for Israel. We are praying for our soldiers. We are praying for those who were killed. And she said, that's good. Psychologically, that will make them feel like they're making a difference. And the rabbi just looked at her and smiled and he said, they're praying. It does make a difference. So it was sort of this dichotomy of, you know, what is it to be a very secular Jew and what is it to be a religious Jew? The secular Jew says this is good psychologically. The religious Jew says, what are you talking about? It's not good psych. It's good. It works. We're talking to God. It makes a difference. So.
You know, I'm going to go off topic here for just 1 minute because one of the things that irks me very much, and I find very much a part of fundraising within my community, meaning the Black community, is that the funds somehow seem to get lost or go in all different directions. You know, you give, for instance, you give to Black Lives Matter. You don't know whether you're giving to the local Black Lives Matter, the national Black Lives Matter. Yeah. How does the Jewish system make sure that the funds are not absconded or, you know, mysteriously disappear like they do in other situations?
That's a really fascinating question that I don't actually know the answer to. But when I think about it, I'm thinking about, you know, all the scandals you hear about, you know, mismanaged charitable funds. And it's not that there's no bad behavior, you know, by Jews in certain ways that you hear about, but most of them seem to be, I can't think of any significant scandals within the Jewish community. And
That's why I'm asking you.
no, I mean, if you tell me ex-Jewish businessman was a lousy, nasty slumlord, I'll go, that's painful to hear, but I'm not terribly surprised. Or, you know, I mean, but the, you know, scandals, you know, like sadly what happened with Black Lives Matter or all other, you know, different kinds of charities, you know. Mr. So-and-so built his mega church and goes to the Bahamas instead of, you know, giving it to the orphanage down the road like he said he would. And those scandals we don't have. You know, maybe it's some kind of.
I mean, it was just an observation off this.
Yeah, Well, you know something? Tzedakah and charity is so ingrained in what it is to be Jewish that I'm not sure that even if you're a secular Jew, if you cross that line, you think God's going to strike you, so you don't mess with that.
Okay.
Even if you're not sure you believe in God, you know, I can cheat you in a business deal, but to mess with tzedakah, even if I don't know the word tzedakah, I'm not sure that's not kind of bone deep.
No, as I said, I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking, through, you know,
I will do some research into that, James, and get back to you because I'm fascinated by the question, but you know, when you asked it, it's like scandals involving Jews. Henry Weinstein.
Banking.
It's a Jewish name. Banking. All kinds of stuff.
yeah, but
Charitable organizations. I can't think of any.
yeah, that
Yeah.
was my point. I mean, like I said, and I've been around for 3/4 of a century, and I'm picking my brain here. I'm thinking that it's like, okay, all right.
Okay, so there's a joke. How many Jews does it take to have an argument?
One.
Why?
I can't tell you why, but I know it was one.
You can always argue with God.
Okay.
And even secular Jews know that joke.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time in Red Bank, New Jersey, too. I'm used to the Friday night seeing the gentleman with the long sideburns and their family.
Have you? So you've been possibly a Shabbos goy. Do you know what a Shabbos goy is?
No, I can't.
Okay, well, you may have been one. So Shabbos goy works like this, and I had to explain this to a lot of my friends who are South Asian, because Muncie, New York, is like the area you were just talking about. It is this huge ultra-Orthodox community. Only it ends up that mixed in and right next to them, there's a huge South Asian community in this area of suburban New York. And so I have had, and my daughter studied classical North Indian dance, Kathak, for 17 years, actually. So we were sort of in with the South Asian community, and I've had friends come up to me and say, can you please explain to me what happened last weekend? I go, well, tell me what happened. And he goes, well, I was visiting my mother, and this hysterical Orthodox Jewish neighbor, it's maybe November or December, flags us down and says, I need help. And we go, sure, what can we do for you? And he says, I need you to light my stove. And we're like, what? He says, I need you to light my stove. We go, okay. So we walk in his house, we light his gas stove. He thanks us profusely, and we leave. And I have no idea what the hell was going on. And the answer is,
on Monday they probably actually get paid a little bit.
He's an Orthodox Jew, and he's not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat, which includes, and somebody opened the door, the wind blew, the stove went out, all of the food is going to be cold for the next 24 hours, but a Shabbos goy, a non-Jew, can come in and light the stove so everybody can have warm food for the Sabbath. So I explained this to them, and the reality is it's even possible he'll come to their house and offer to pay them on Monday, because he can't touch money on the Sabbath either. But he can pay for the service on Sunday or Monday, but he can't do it on Friday night or Saturday. So I don't know whether that explains a few odd experiences you may have had in your life. Like, oh, that's what was going on.
There you go. Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about storytelling, because I noticed that on your business card.
Mm-hmm.
Storytelling is a significant part of your organization's mission. How can storytelling help in countering negative narratives and strengthening Jewish identity in the face of adversity? And do you have a favorite story or example?
Oh, I have lots of them. And most of them aren't even Jewish. They're just, so here's the thing. Families, not Jewish families, all families, to some extent, are, if not under attack, under a lot of pressure today. I mean, I know people who choose to have kids and they have friends who look at them and go, why would you do that? There are people who go, I can't have children. The world is too terrible. I won't bring children into it. I have people who go, I want to be fulfilled. I don't want to be tied down. There's a, and, we have a lot of ways to choose whether or not to have families. We do not live in a world, where there are no forms of birth control or anything else. So, it's not like you get married, you have no choices. First of all, women don't have to get married. Men don't have to get married. Out of wedlock births are not the kind of scandal they were for a very long time. There's a lot of, single parent families, particularly single mothers who were never married, not just not married now. It's not a world that aggressively supports two-parent families staying together and staying together through tough times. And I read a really interesting happiness survey years ago. They interviewed people who had never been married, who were married and didn't have children, who were married and were in the middle of raising children, and who were married and had grown children. And they interviewed everybody, and the two happiest groups, almost neck and neck, were people who had never had children, who were single, and people who had children who had grown up and left home. The least happy group were the people who were in the middle of raising children. So apparently, if you survive raising your kids and they leave home, the sense of satisfaction is so deep that you are far and away the happiest human being. But it's a long road and it's expensive, not just, in money, but in the effort and the resources and the commitment, and the amount of pain it takes. But there's an enormous satisfaction for having done something that was difficult. And today, traveling that path is perhaps harder than it's ever been. So one of the things that I believe keeps families together, that fosters resilience, is traditions and stories and rituals. And they could be religious or not. If you have family holidays, there's all those movies, there's all those family holiday movies about the terrible Christmases and the terrible Thanksgivings when everybody gets together and it's, and it doesn't matter whether you're black, white, Italian, green, or Martian. It's all about crazy Uncle Louie and Aunt Mary who's going to cut up somebody with a butcher knife, and the parents who were divorced who come together and still argue, and the children are tearing the house apart. But they're funny, and they're not just funny because we identify with them. They're funny because they also give us a sense of security. The family gets together on Thanksgiving and goes through this awful mess every single year, and you can expect it, and you're just wondering, Uncle Eddie, who's, in his 80s, what 20-year-old is he going to show up with as his date for Thanksgiving this year? And you're kind of anticipating, I want to know it, just how much younger than, is this young enough to be his great-granddaughter this year, the new girlfriend? So, but it gives you a sense of being grounded. In my family, in that case, we have these grotesque, horrible Thanksgivings that everybody in the world identifies with, or at least can see something in themselves, so I can make an award-winning movie about it. Actually, all the Medea movies are like that because they're archetypes. They're families with stories we recognize, and there's other stuff like that. Now, it's nice. I would much prefer if those stories are more positive, and supportive. But the other thing is having stories makes people feel like they belong. It makes them feel attached. For almost 40 years in Chappaqua, while my parents lived there and even after my father died, we had Thanksgiving dinners where we had approximately 40 people. Of that 40 people, 30 of them had been coming for decades. And then there'd be kind of a shifting, group of 10 newbies and stuff. But something I noticed one year is we had all these family stories that we would tell. And the people, for example, knew the story about the year that my mother didn't have enough chairs, but that was okay because one of the guests had so much fish house punch before dinner they passed out, so nobody noticed we were missing it. We didn't have an extra chair. Or the year that my cousin who was in the Merchant Marine was home, and my uncle was he wasn't feeling well, so my cousin gave him something like, it said Pepto-Bismol on the bottle, and he drank it and then he threw up. And he said, "What did you give me? It tasted like greasy soap." And it ends up my grandmother had crossed out Pepto-Bismol with a pen with one skinny line and written something like Vaseline Intensive Care Lotion, which for some reason she decanted into the Pepto-Bismol bottle. So stories like that. I noticed one year that somebody who had been coming to Thanksgiving for about 3 or 4 years was talking to somebody who was there for the first time, and they were telling my family stories to the newbie. And this is somebody who had started coming to my mother used to say, "You are not allowed, you are not invited to our Thanksgiving if you have accessible family or friends." So the non-related people who came to our Thanksgiving were always people who didn't have someplace else they belonged. And we gave them, inclusion in this, in this insane family Thanksgiving. We did all of it ourselves. We would start 4 days before. I had one friend who would fly in from California every year because she'd started coming during college, and we would cook and we'd do it all by ourselves. So this was somebody who had been an orphan, so to speak, who had started coming to Thanksgiving 3 or 4 years earlier, and now they were sharing Thanksgiving stories with somebody who was a newbie. And it made an enormous impression on me because it's told me this person felt like they belonged. By telling those stories, they were identifying themselves with our tribe and had a sense of inclusion and attachment. And I think for kids, so I'm going to contrast this with the most horrifying public service ad that I have ever seen on the New York City subways, which I saw about 10 or 12 years ago. And it was a picture of a new mother with a baby. And it said, and then there was a picture of a cell phone somewhere on the ad. And it said, "Look at your babies. Put down the phone and look at your baby." How many people do you know that don't look at their children anymore? They're always on their cell phones. They don't look at their kids. If you tell stories to your children, if you talk to them, part of this issue with traditions and rituals and stories is interaction. And that human interaction is evaporating. It's disappearing in the face of technology and social media and narcissism. And I should be able to satisfy myself and be happy. Well, the reality is you have kids, you're raising them, you're going to be unhappy and have to sacrifice yourself sometimes. I'll tell you, it's totally worth it in the end. But yeah, part of being a parent is sacrificing some of your self-interest, your pleasure, your whatever, to your children. And if you know anything about psychology, attachment disorders are awful. Small, very young children who feel detached develop all kinds of severe psychological problems, including, it being a fast track to sociopathy and all kinds of other things. And I have a theory that one of the problems with all of this goes back to the invention of the modern stroller. Okay?
Okay.
How are children trotted around before you have strollers? Either somebody is carrying them, whether it's on your hip or in a sling or a carrier, or even they're in an old-fashioned baby carriage. But in an old-fashioned baby carriage, the baby's in the carriage, and when they look up, who do they see? They see mommy, or at least a familiar caretaker. Now, I want you to think for a moment, James.
And they're very high.
You're a very small child, and mom's taking you out, and she plops you in that stroller, and out you go into a world of giants, and you're at knee level. And at best, mom is a disembodied voice somewhere above and behind you. I don't like strollers. I have friends who look at me and say, you're out of your mind. Debbie, you've lost it. You lost it years ago. But I seriously think that strollers were, in some psychological way, the precursor to what cell phones have become. So, and
Very interesting. Very interesting theory.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very funny. I'm very short, but I didn't like, I'd already sort of had this theory about strollers, and I was very lucky. My daughter weighed 6 pounds, 9 ounces when she was born. That's exactly what I weighed. When I was born, it was a perfectly average baby weight. When my daughter was born, it was actually the low end of normal.
Right.
But she was little, and I had 5 friends who had babies, all born within like 2 weeks of each other. And they used to say to me, "Can I hold her?" And I go, "Yeah, sure. You got one of your own, but you want to hold mine? Go ahead." Because they all had modern monster babies. I don't think one of their babies was under 7.5, almost 8 pounds at birth. One of them was close to 11,
Yeah.
So they never had a little tiny infant to cuddle. So they borrowed mine for, what does it feel like to cuddle a little tiny baby? But she was small, so it made it easy. But I didn't like strollers that much. I kind of had that theory already. So I had a baby carrier. And I carried her either on my front or my back. And I saw another mom doing something. And so as soon as not long after my daughter could hold up her head, I turned her around in the front carrier. So she was facing out.
Okay.
And oh, did she love it. She was immediately like, whole world out here. But she's attached to mommy. So her back is to my front, and she's facing the world at, short I am, but relatively eye level compared to kids in strollers.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that she's grew up. Her handle on, she's won't be boxed on Twitter, but she's known in the podcasting and Twitter community as Tiny But Fierce.
Okay.
And I think part of that comes from the fact that she spent a good part of the first year of her life on mom's chest facing the world outward.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
And then, and that, how do you communicate with infants? You communicate with them by holding them, by responding to them, and then by talking to them. As they go from being infants to babies to toddlers, you talk to them. And I have always talked to children like they were people. I had one friend who looked at me one day when my daughter was about 7 or 8 or something, and she said, it's really nice to see how Jess has grown up to the level at which you have always been talking to her.
I was also told I was like 7
But I always talked to kids. I never did baby talk. And I remember we lost something valuable, like somebody had an expensive watch that fell off and we couldn't find it. And one of my cousin's children was wandering around and was like 4 years old or something. And I remember turning to him and saying, "Do you know where that watch went? Do you know where Peter's watch is?" And he said, "Yeah, it's under the couch." But before he said that, somebody said, "Why are you asking him? He's 4 years old." Well, yeah, he's 4 years old, and he's smart, and he's observant, and he's the right eye level. And he saw the watch go under the couch, but nobody asked him because he's a 4-year-old.
I
So stories matter. They help you understand the world. They help you if they are stories that are family stories or cultural stories or religious stories. They help you define who you are in relation to your culture, the people around you. Most people think of Jews as being people who are, they're known as, the people of the book. People think of, oh yeah, Jews are lawyers, they're smart, they read, they care about education. Well, part of that is the fact that the Old Testament, with if do traditional religious practice, is reread from beginning to end every single year. Starts on the same day. There's a celebration. We're wrapping up the Torah for this year. The next Saturday, there's another celebration because we're starting to read it all over again. So there's sort of there's a tradition of these are our stories. This is our book. This is how God's, talked to us. And we reread it every single year. And it creates a sort of a habit that, you can choose to incorporate in all kinds of ways. Most families do this with things like family holidays, but how many families don't do family holidays anymore?
that's true. I mean, we have a problem trying to do afternoon dinner together. So I definitely understand where you're coming from there. Um, let's talk about education and awareness. What role do you believe that education plays in combating anti-Semitism, and how can families integrate this into their daily lives?
Well, there's two sides of that. There's how do you combat the reality and stresses of anti Semitism if you are Jewish within your own family, your own community? You know, um, how do you combat racism within your own family, within your own community? How do you combat, you know, no Irish accepted within your own family, within your own, however these things happen? So there's the side of how do we take this and use it to make us stronger and more resilient instead of allowing it to destroy us? And then the other piece of the issue is how do you get rid of anti Semitism? How do you get rid of racism? How do you get rid of any type of we hate those people and it's okay to do so? So there's, if you're asking about internally to make my family, my children, my community stronger and more resilient, a lot of people go back into the faith as a faith. A lot of people respond with, well, okay, so in Judaism in particular, right into the Bible, it is built in that there in every generation, somebody will hate us, somebody will want to kill us, and where are our traditions that give us strength? You can start with Passover and Moses in Egypt. So while there are religious traditions and stories and beliefs that are pre-Judaic that talk about God protecting those, or God or my gods, because there were more polytheists floating around, protect us against our enemies. What is sort of unique about the Passover story is that this may be the first time in human history that the story is one of God takes slaves and makes them free men. He takes them out of bondage. He takes those who are not valued, and he gives them freedom and offers them opportunities, which they then proceed over the following chapters of the Bible to screw up one after another. But he gives them the opportunity. And eventually they go back to the promised land. We have the story, Purim is the story of Esther, which is, I think most people I know who have any kind of a Christian or even secular background are familiar with the story of Passover and Moses taking the Jews out of Egypt. But not as many people know the story of Purim, which is the story of Queen Esther, and the fact that the evil Haman gets the emperor of Persia, who has married Esther, to agree to kill all the Jews. And he has his seal because he's his right hand, and you can't undo anything with the king's seal on it. And then Esther takes her life in her own hands and goes to her husband without permission, which is punishable by death unless he reaches out his scepter and says, you don't have to die. I'll listen to you. And she sort of explains to him what's going on, and he gives the seal to her uncle Mordecai, because now Haman is now persona non grata and hung on the scaffolding he set up for Mordecai, and tells Mordecai, you can give permission to the Jews to defend themselves. And the story of Purim is one that resonates with a lot of Jews right now. It has shocked me enormously when I realize how many people have no idea what happened on October 7th. A small portion of the blame for that goes to Israel and the Israeli government, who said, we will not make, I don't know how to describe it, violence porn out of the horrific deaths of 1,400 Israelis, and publicize how horrible it was. There are people who have no idea that babies were beheaded. They don't know the degree of rapes that occurred, and that women had their breasts cut off while they were alive and being raped. That families were locked in their safe rooms and burned alive. That a 13-year-old boy was told, we won't kill your family if you will go to your neighbors and get them to open the door for you. And he had to watch family after family killed. And then, of course, they did kill him and his family. And it goes on and on and on. The Christian Arabs, so we're about 1,200 Israelis killed, 1,200 Jewish Israelis killed. But there are 200 other people who were either non-Jewish Israelis, some of whom were Christian Arabs, some of whom were other denomination and Israeli, and some of whom were non-Israelis, but living in Israel. And some of them were Muslim. And there was one guy who got away, his son got away, I think. And the son was shot in the head and survived, a teenager, and testified that when Hamas came through and they said, don't kill us, we're Muslim, and they said, you're living and working in Israel, you're even worse than the Jews, and then they killed his whole family. And they left him for dead, and he survived, and then he told what had happened. The number of people who don't know that, part of it is the Israeli government, barring the things, for example, that I have told you that are available, and then the stories of some of the those who were kidnapped, the hostages, have brought back. The mainstream press doesn't share this. And there's a lot more gruesome detail that the Israeli government has said we will not do that to the families of our dead or to our dead. It is a form of desecration. It's basically violence porn, and we won't do that. So between the mainstream media going, well, if you're not going to beat us over the head and give us all the juicy, salacious, grotesque details, of these murders, well, we're just going to ignore it. So there's all kinds of people out there going, oh, well, they're lying. It didn't happen.
Believe all women. That's true.
And
Yes.
and there's also there's the feminists who I am so angry at. I cannot see straight. Believe all women except Israeli women who've been raped. I not a happy camper. Not a
Yeah.
happy camper.
I
Again, regardless of what they say.
we can hear it in your voice and see it in your face. So let's kind of wrap things up here a little bit. I didn't really intend on keeping you on this long, but you're such an interesting guest.
Thank you.
We, we- uh, as I had told you in the beginning, I usually keep my interviews down to about 20 or 30 minutes, but you have so many interesting things to say, and I think there are things that need to be heard. So my last question for you today is, and we're talking about future generations and hope. Um, hope is a weapon. Hope is a word that I use very sparingly because I think that a lot of religious and religious bodies use hope as a weapon. Um, you hope that things get better rather than putting it into your actions. You hope that your neighbor does it so that you don't have to. Uh, so me and Hope have a lot of uh,
An
problems.
ambiguous relationship.
So looking ahead, what do you hope to achieve with your organization in terms of creating multi-generational legacies?
So, okay, so I'm out there as a coach as virtual Jewish mother for rent. I'm also the founder of an organization that barely exists yet, except that I've uh, claimed my territory out in the cloud by grabbing every version of Stronger Families Now. So I've got the .com and the .net and the whatever, all of them, and the singular versions and the plural versions. So, um, and what I would like to create, and honestly, Virtual Jewish Mother is a way, among other things, of doing some sort of paid market research to give me a better feeling for what people will pay for so that I can get the organization up and running. But my dream is that Stronger Families Now will be a portal. There are hundreds, maybe thousands, of people doing really good work around families. There are therapists and organizations that help with intergenerational trauma. There are companies that will help you take your photographs and your memories and create stories and books and get it together so you can share it with your family. There are a slew, there are a lot of questionable parenting coaches and services, but there's also a lot of really good ones. There's one woman I'm aware of that what I think it's Ram, Raising a Mogul. She's all about encouraging your kids to be entrepreneurs at an early age. There are people who they have money or they want to make money and they want their children to be good stewards of the financial legacy that they will leave them. So there's everything from the emotional to the psychological to the religious to the monetary that are things that can help families be stronger and glue them together. And it depends whether your values, what are your interests. It's I one of the things that I'm good at an awful lot of stuff. I know a lot of stuff, but I'm tone deaf. And to me, music is like magic. So I get such a kick when out of it when somebody says, "Oh, in my family we make music. We sing or we all play musical instruments." I mean, it's like magic. And you'll find quite often it's intergenerational. So one of the questions I like to ask people, do you have any kids, James?
Yes.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting that you say that because my son is actually very good at graphics. Uh, my younger brother has played keyboards for the last 50 some years. I have another brother that plays drums. Uh, However, my artistic work tends to be, I guess, in podcasting and creating opportunities for others. But we all have our niche, and you know, uh, it took me quite a while to find mine, especially after retirement,
Mm-hmm.
because I used to be a chef. And once you get around our age and you start getting the appliances in your mouth and all this, what I mean, things don't taste the way they used to.
Yeah.
All those different kinds of things, and so but you know. Hopefully, I mean, we have all managed to survive, but I don't want to survive. I want to thrive, and this is what I want for the people that I tend to serve. So, uh, why don't you give me your final thoughts? Tell us a little bit more about your organization.
All right. So what I'll do is I'll say when I asked you if you had children, I was going to say, is there something you did with your kids or you would like to imagine your children doing with their children or make it happen now that you would like to imagine your grandchildren doing with their children? And most people never think that way long term. And it's not that you can create something and guarantee it will last that long intergenerationally, but at least it's something worth thinking about. I would like to think about my great grandchildren sharing the Christmas tree ornaments with their kids that we hung on the tree when my kids were little. Something even like that. So, stronger families now, hopefully, will be a portal where families, individuals, groups of families, maybe in some kind of club through, you know, uh, houses of faith or civic organizations. They'll be able to come, they'll be able to do workshops, they'll be able to clarify what's important to them, and then they will be offered resources. Or somebody looked at me and said, "Oh, kind of like a glorified Angie's List for everything families." And I said, I could live with that explanation, but I want to connect. There's good resources out there. I want to be able to vet them at least minimally to confirm that they are pretty good, legitimate resources. And then I want to take families and say, you matter. Let's talk about how do you think about your family in terms of intergenerational legacies. That could be money, that could be traditions and rituals, that could be just knowing your family's history and doing like ancestry stuff. But whatever it is, part of what makes families families is they're not just in this generation. They have a history. Everybody in the family has a past. And if you don't have one, if you're a foster kid or an orphan, we can help you create roots that you didn't have. And then take that interest in strength and resilience and rootedness and make sure that those families have the skills to pass those things on, whether it's a tradition of faith, music, money, whatever. And that's my big dream.
Yeah. It sounds like a wonderful endeavor, and hopefully I'll be able to take that journey with you, since we belong to some of the same groups.
Yeah.
Uh, it's been very interesting talking to you tonight. I have a few minutes. Would your daughter like to come on and talk to
Uh,
us about her? Uh,
yeah, what she does on yeah, she's she's a veteran podcaster compared to me. She's become because she's chronically ill. She has not yet started a channel or something of her own, but she's a regular guest and occasional co-host. Jess,
Yeah.
you're invited to come on over and spend a couple of minutes yourself. So I'm gonna take off my headset and let her put it on.
okay.
James, it was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I really appreciated having the chance to talk
I
to you.
I appreciate talking to you. I was supposed to be at the meeting Thursday, but unfortunately, I had to take a medical procedure. But I will definitely see you at the next meeting, and perhaps in between then, if you know someone that would make a guest, you have my email. You can let me know,
Yeah,
and I even look forward to, maybe we'll have another little reunion here on the podcast a little later down the line.
that would be
I,
great.
I did
Thank
enjoy talking with you, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so
All
much.
right, I'm going to get up and hand her my headset. What time is it? 7:24. I'm going to go right. Howdy.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. And yourself?
Okay. Hey, every day above ground is a good day. That's what I
Absolutely.
say. You would you like to introduce yourself to our audience and
Uh,
tell us a little
sure.
bit about yourself?
I'm Deborah's daughter, Jess. Some people might know me from Twitter/X or even YouTube and Rumble as Tiny But Fierce or at Won't Be Boxed. Um, I do some streams. I mostly do streams that are like kind of geeky nerd culture war based. Like I was big into comics growing up, animation, anime from Japan. I've gotten very into in manga.
Okay.
My uncle, my mom's deceased brother, was actually a world famous dungeons master, so I know a lot of the D&D geeky stuff too. um, but something I haven't been doing as much with the live streaming, but I'm starting to transfer over more of is some activism that I've been doing for years through Facebook and through other things that about chronic illness and chronic pain patients. Because there's a lot of people like me that have a chronic illness that makes you basically disabled and homebound, but there's nothing obvious. Like our hair isn't falling out. We're not missing a limb, all those things. So, I mean, the amount of doctors I've had say the phrase, but you don't look sick. You're a doctor. How can those words come out of your mouth? But it happens, and it has happened to many of us. So there are groups and places where people are like, you're not alone. Yes, you're sick. Yes, you're disabled. We are here for you. You can tell us all the horrible things that have happened, and we'll tell you all the horrible things that happened to us, and we can all enjoy Schadenfreude together.
Yeah.
The chronic pain stuff is a little bit different because everyone has you get a pain from some multiple reasons. Someone who had a botched surgery or someone who has small fiber neuropathy is different than somebody who was shot or lost a limb, but they're both chronic pain patients. So there's so many different types of pain patients that you can find. And the last few years in this country and most of the West has been very, very hard for pain patients. The statistics are in. The truth of the matter is prescription drugs had almost nothing to do with the opiate epidemic. There were some pill mills, that's true, but the majority of people getting prescriptions needed those prescriptions because the prescriptions have gone down by almost 700% because since the 2016 guidelines that the CDC put out, just every year, less opiates are allowed to be produced, less opiates are allowed to be prescribed. There are doctors all over the country and other countries like the NHS, NHS, whatever the national healthcare system in Britain is really, really bad at this too. And the idea is that they're still going after pain doctors prescribing perfectly legitimate scripts. Because I'm sorry, this may seem obnoxious or rude, but I honestly think if you work at the DEA these days, you're probably a coward. You're an incompetent coward who goes after doctors instead of the actual drug dealers. And there are doctors all over this country dropping patients or giving up their practices or going to jail for doing perfectly straightforward, honest, legitimate work as a pain specialist. I mean,
Well, as you know, the VA
oh God.
has almost specifically cut out giving you pain
Yeah,
pills.
the VA made an announcement just like 18 months ago or something. The VA made an announcement that their stance is opiates don't work.
Yeah.
10,000 years of human history, but opiates don't work. You want to say you think they're addictive, you want to say you're narcophobic, you want to say you hate them, fine, but you can't say they don't work. That's just it's just a false statement.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like when my generation came back from Vietnam, we were battle fatigued, we were nuts, we were and then now all of a sudden we all have PTSD. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's two things in that. For the way I see it personally, is there's shell shock, which has always existed, which has existed even when we didn't have shelling and we just had swords and maces and shit. But that's always existed. But I think also to some degree, especially for your generation, and unfortunately your generation was kind of the beginning of it, is life is so much easier now. You don't wake up at dawn and work on the farm or work in the forge or do whatever and everything else. You didn't have to live through a Great Depression. You didn't have to live through the flu pandemics. You guys
But
actually had a
we all
good childhood. You had a
we all
good
came
childhood.
back. We all came back with that idea, that we want our children to have it better than we did.
No, and absolutely, I totally get that. Yes, parents always want their children to have
Yeah,
it better than
yeah.
they did.
And,
But
and
to
then,
some degree,
and then you,
y'all were taken so good care of in general that to put you into I mean, I can't even go over right now. Military history, I would the amount of stupidity of decisions made in Vietnam is just I could go on for hours. I'm not going to go into that at the moment. But the fact that you guys didn't have to suffer such hardships in childhood, that going into a war zone was just unbelievably worse for you psychologically. You didn't have to go through those hardships that made people a little bit more callous and had a little bit thicker like ability to watch people. I mean, I talk to people today. People don't understand. In the past, most people's babies died. Children died. That was normal. Everyone, why you have 10 kids? Because most of them are going to die.
yeah.
And today, like a baby's born with even a problem, and people freak out like it's the worst thing in the world. I'm like, we are just too soft. The real world has hardships, and when we don't have to face those hardships, especially when we're young, when we get hit as we're older, it hits us much, much harder. At least that's how I see it.
I just had a gentleman on my sports show, and we were talking about whether or not this generation as compared to generations past. When so yeah. So tell me a little bit about the podcast that you've been on, and some of the things that you feel are relevant, and tell people where they can find you.
Well, the podcast I've been on most of the time, I'm still doing mostly geeky podcasts, and Wednesdays at 6 Central, 4 p.m. Pacific, I'm on something called Winding Down Wednesdays with the Common Nerd. It's a really fun show. We talk about.
Oh, we got disconnected. Let's hope she can get back here. I'm going to give her a few minutes to try to catch up. But I hope everyone has enjoyed this inaugural session of the Diamond Factory. I will be trying to put on these shows at least 2 or 3 times a month. And we can talk about, as I said, I want to talk about, I'm going to be talking with people that have solutions. Okay, I see she's back now. Let's get her back up here. All right, there you go. Now we can't hear you.
Hello. Yay!
There you go. There we are. There we go.
Blame is completely on her. She has an amazing, tiny little 10 terabyte amazing new computer that she hasn't set up yet. So this old computer keeps dying on us. um,
Always blame it on the parents. See, they didn't provide me with enough. See, there you have.
but so what is that? The Winding Down Wednesdays on the Common Nerds channel is talk about what's happening in comics, what's happening in Hollywood and TVs, like especially the Marvel movies, DC.
Oh, okay. Marvel Comics, you got me right there. Okay, I'm hooked.
But I'm going to be on a show next Wednesday called Wrong Think with a channel called Devil Made Me Do It. He's a really great guy. And he's actually giving me the entire stream to talk about what's going on with pain patients and what's going on. And a friend of mine I've met recently who's doing activism for the VA, specifically pain patients. He was vaccine injured. He was forced to take the COVID-19 vaccine, and he got Guillain-Barré syndrome after spending weeks hospitalized. And he's permanently in a wheelchair, and his life is changed unbelievably from it. And he's trying to use what energy he has and what connections he has to push for A, awareness of that vaccine injury, and B, the fact that the VA is not taking care of these guys and girls, and they're being treated as badly, if not worse in some ways, than the VA pain patients. And so, I mean, I know a lot about what the VA is doing, and I could talk about it, but I figured an actual veteran coming and talking about it's probably better. But yeah, I'm trying to get more into. I'm trying to get more into the activism with the streaming and stuff. It's just hard. A lot of times I'm talking about stuff that's very hard to talk about, that I can break down, I can cry. I wasn't really comfortable doing that live in the past. But I've had people tell me that seeing raw emotion and seeing that this is so important and such a big issue makes people believe it more or understand it more. So even if it turns out I'm going to cry, I guess I'm going to be doing more streaming about it.
That's what America is all about. Pain and suffering. If we can see that pain, we can feel that pain, then you're much more sympathetic. It seems. Yes. So hopefully my audience have those things down pat, and they will be able to join you. I appreciate your time and you setting your mother up here for success. So, but maybe as I said down the line as we get our. I'm just bringing this particular program back on track for obvious reasons. Not just because of the upcoming election, but I think people need to hear different points of view. And
absolutely,
whether I agree with them or not, that is not the point. The point is that I believe everyone should have a voice. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a lot of stupid people out here, and as you can see, I wear it on my hat, a proud badge of courage. I would love to help you, but I just can't help stupid. So, but
I have to say, I have great admiration for you, because these days I try not to be in an echo chamber myself. I try to listen to other opinions and the other side, and half the time these days, this stuff that comes out of the other side's mouth, I literally can't even listen to. So I have so much admiration for someone who can sit there and listen to something they really don't believe in or they really disagree with without like losing their mind. I have huge admiration for you.
Oh, you have no idea. You have to go back and listen to some of my podcasts. Like you said, sometimes like. I can get up to here and then all so yes,
Yeah, I'll put something on YouTube. We're like, all right, let's see what this person has to say, and then I'm like,
getting tenser and tenser. Okay, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off. I can't. I have a pain condition that's triggered by adrenaline. I don't need to get this angry right now.
Yes. uh, hey, after all these years, 50 years later, I'm still taking anger management. So, yeah. But you need those tools. You have
Yep.
to have those tools. Yeah. So, as I said, I would like to thank you and your mom for taking the time out on a Friday evening and spending some time with me and my audience. And
Our
I look
pleasure.
forward to having everyone else, having everyone back at some time. You have a
That would be
great
great.
Friday evening.
I would have a lot of fun coming back again.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you. All right. Have a great night.
You have a good night, and good night to all your chat.
All right. That was Deborah and her daughter. And like I said, next week or week after, look for us again with someone else that is trying to make a difference in this day and time. Thank you very much for listening to the Diamond Factory, and I'll see you soon.